All right. Well, I'm still out here doing my water boiling thing, but I'm nearly done. The bed's going to be toasty warm tonight again, as usual. And more importantly, it'll be toasty warm in the morning when it's quite cold. I kind of like this lighting. It's a bit creepy standing out here in this lighting. Anyway, as you know, I visited closest store today, way up in the boonies. Long abandoned general store that I remember from when I was a little kid. It was still on the go then, but it closed up sometime after that. And it's in pretty rough shape now. It's in the process of falling down and caving in and falling over. Anyway, I'm going to tell you kind of a comical story about Close's store, and specifically about Mrs. Close. Basically, Mr. Close was a farmer. All the land behind the store, that was all farmland. I think it still is, really. But Mr. Close was a farmer anyway, and his wife ran the store, and of course they lived in the store. They had the kitchen downstairs at the back of the store, and then upstairs they had a sitting room, like a parlor, and 2 bedrooms. Anyway, Mrs. Close would run the store. Well, I had a friend, she's passed away now, but she was a niece of the Closes. And she knew the Closes well anyway, she was a relation of theirs. They were her aunt and uncle. And she told me this story. And I'm going to tell you the story now. It's kind of comical. Mrs. Close was not always the most honest person. She had a little touch of the greed, And yeah, she'd pull a fast one on you if she could. That's going to factor into the story. There's a reason I'm telling you that. I'm not just telling you that to run Mrs. Close into the ground. It's important that you know this because it's an important part of the story. Anyway, one day, back in the old times, there was a man that was staying up in that area. He was living up there. And he used to come into the store sometimes. And Mrs. Close and he were talking one day. And he was talking to Mrs. Close about how much he missed his mother's raisin bread. That she used to just load it with raisins, and it was really good. And he's never had anything quite so good since. Like the store-bought stuff just ain't the same, Not like Mom used to make. Anyway, Mrs. Close, she could be hired to do some baking for you. If you wanted her to bake for you, you pay her a fee and she'd bake for you. That was a little sideline she had at the store, So she told him, she said, well, if you want me to make you some good homemade raisin bread, I'll do it. She said, you just pay me so much a loaf or whatever, so many cents per loaf. And you provide the ingredients so I don't have to run out and get everything. And I'll bake it up for you. So he thought that was great. Anyway, he said, well, yeah, I'd really like that, It'd be so nice to have some good homemade raisin bread like my mom used to make, So yeah, that'll be fine. I'll come in, I'll bring you all the stuff that you need, and you bake up the loaves for me and I'll pay you for them. No problem. So the next day he come in and he had the flour and everything else that would be needed, the raisins. He bought a great big bag of raisins, like the biggest bag of raisins he could get, because he wanted lots of raisins in his raisin bread, just like his mom used to do when he was a little boy. He wanted it like that, because this was his thing. He missed his mom's raisin bread, which was just loaded with raisins. Really good anyway. And so he brought all this stuff in anyway, gave it all to Mrs. Close. Mrs. Close told him, she said, okay, you come back in a few days and your loaves of raisin bread will be ready. You can come pick them up in a few days. So he was pretty happy anyway. I'm going to get some raisin bread, some good raisin bread. So anyway, he leaves the stuff with her, comes back in a few days, salivating, anticipating, thinking he's going to have a raisin bread feast. He's going to have raisin bread just like Mom used to make. This is going to be great. Anyway, he picks up his loaves, he pays her for them, whatever the agreed amount was, takes his loaves away. Now, there's a happy man, loading his loaves of raisin bread into his car. I'm going to go home and just slaver that up, cut a big hunk of raisin bread off there, slaver that up with butter, and sit in his chair, probably listen to the radio. And he's going to be like, remembering, just like his mom used to make, Kind of brings a tear to your eye when you think of it, doesn't it? Anyway, unfortunately for him, it didn't work out just that way. A few days later, he's back at the store, and he's got these loaves with him. And he's got one of these loaves, he's holding it up in the air, he's waving it around in the air, and he's yelling at Mrs. Close. And he's saying to her, I brought you a great big effing bag of raisins. And he said, I defy you to find one GD raisin in any of these loaves you baked. He said, I defy you to find one GD raisin in any of these loaves you baked. And he was just really letting her have it anyway, tear the strip right off her. What she had done is she had put, I suppose, enough raisins into the bread that a lawyer would be able to get her out of trouble, because technically it would be raisin bread. If there was one raisin in it in a loaf, it would be raisin bread, But she kept most of the raisins for herself. She had basically stolen the man's raisins and given him substandard loaves of raisin bread. So, anyway, that's the story. That was Mrs. Close. That's what she did, Anyway, it's creepy out here at night, It really is. But that's just the story, anyway, of Mrs. Close and the raisin bread and her little raisin theft scheme that she had going there. I know she had a reputation, too, for cheating kids out of their pop bottle money. Back in the old days, we used to collect pop bottles, and they were worth 2 cents a piece when I was a little boy. I remember that. And then they went up to 5 cents. I remember when they went up to 5 cents a piece, the refundable pop bottles we had years ago. And anyway, I guess she was bad for that, too. She wouldn't give the kids the money for their pop bottles and stuff, She'd cheat them out of it. So, yeah, not very nice anyway. You got to be pretty miserable and greedy to do that. This lady who was a friend of mine, she's passed away now, but she told me a story. She actually died from complications of diabetes. Her heart just wrecked her heart, and she couldn't live, and she died. But anyway, she told me that her uncle, Mr. Close, that he had told her one time that he had all their money buried on that property. And he said where he had buried it, nobody will ever find it. And nobody ever has. People have looked, and nobody's ever found that money. I think the reason that the interior of the store got all torn apart. See, in 1982, when I was up there and I took those pictures, the interior of the store was still intact. Everything was still in there, because you could look through the windows and see. But at some point after that, somebody went in there and they threw everything from the store outside, and they tore all the inside walls out. And that's why you can see all the studs and stuff now, and that's the reason. And they did that, I think, at least, that they did it looking for the fortune, thinking that the money might be in the walls. Whether they found anything, I don't know. As far as I know, the money was never found. But somewhere hidden on that property is a crap ton of money, anyway, apparently. And those people did have money, and they were from that generation that had gone through the Depression, and they didn't trust banks because people took an awful hosing in 1929, 1930, from the banks. The banks just took everybody's money, and they never forgot that. People who came up through there, they just lost everything. If you had your savings in the bank, it was gone. Just overnight, it was gone. And so I think they didn't trust the banks. Most people didn't of that generation, and so it was quite common for older people to hoard money and to hide money in mayonnaise jars and in old sacks and in mattresses and tied up under in a sack under the table or wherever, bury it under the floorboards or in the walls or on the property or whatever. And apparently that's what he had done anyway. He had buried all their money. And he said he knew where it was, but nobody else would ever know. Because where he had buried it, nobody would ever find it. So anyway, that's the story. They're both gone now. They're both passed away a long time ago. And nobody's ever found it. So what he said was right anyway. Or at least if they have found it, they've never said anything. But then really, would you say anything? Maybe you wouldn't. Anyway, that's the story of the raisin bread and the pop bottles and the buried money. That property has quite a history to it anyway. It's funny, when I was working for the auctioneer, the signs off that building came in to be sold. Somebody had taken all the signs off it and brought them in to be sold, and I don't know if they were the property owner or who they were, but somebody took all the signs off it. Whether it was theft or whether it was somebody who actually owned the stuff, I just don't know. Because if it was the property owner that brought the stuff in to sell it, well, it's theirs, if it's their property. So, nothing wrong with that. But whether that was the case or whether somebody just went out there and took them, I really don't know. But we had them for sale anyway, the signs off closest store. That's why you don't see any signs on it now, but there were signs on it. For a long time there were signs still on it. But anyway, that's the story. We'll talk to you later.